This is 16 to 1, a podcast about education, teaching, and learning.
Hello.
Hey.
Welcome.
What's up?
There's a lot of snow outside.
There is. Not as much as Christmas, but there is a lot.
No, yeah, Christmas was better. We had a big old blizzardy, blowy white Christmas. It was nice.
This is not that.
This is not that, but there's still plenty of snow.
There's enough snow for a snow day. And
Our
that's
dog-
all that matters
Right.
for me.
Our dog loves it too. So most people in the
Yeah,
household are
she's a
happy.
big fan.
Yeah.
Like bigger than us even, I would say most days.
I think the cat is the only one who doesn't care about the snow.
I don't think she's ever been in snow. I can't imagine why I would have ever taken her into
do you
the
want to
snow.
introduce
She's
her?
long-haired. That's like my worst nightmare.
She
Absolutely not.
I think she would hate it, but
She would be sufficiently angry.
sufficiently angry.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
would not.
Yeah.
That would not be good for us.
No.
Anyways, there's snow.
Yep,
January is over.
it is. We made it through the first month of 2021.
We have a new president.
We do. Anything else?
That's it. That's the episode.
That's
Bye.
the news. Goodbye.
That's the most positive we've been since probably February of last year.
People have been talking about how it's nice not to have to think about just constant impending doom all of the time.
There's
It
less
is a change
doom.
of pace.
There's
It
less
is-
doom.
There's still a lot of problems, a lot of things we have to fix as a
Yeah.
country, but at least we're not held hostage by a Twitter account, you know?
Yes, that's a good feeling.
At least we're not there.
No. And I'm getting vaccinated in a couple weeks, and that has given me some
Very
some
excited about that,
brief
yeah.
moments of hope.
I'm excited for you for that.
I
will
know
probably
it's not-
never get the vaccine because there's
Yeah.
nothing much wrong with me and I'm youngish. So
And you work from home.
I
and
work
you're
from home.
very low.
I'm not
yeah.
exactly high priority.
Well, I'm sorry for you.
That's
but I
okay.
do feel good knowing that I will be because my
Yes.
parents aren't yet either.
Yeah.
And your parents aren't yet either.
I don't know. I don't know
So I
when they're
mean,
supposed to be.
I feel good about my.
Yeah.
I'm happy to go get it. I'm a little nervous, but I'm happy.
Good.
It gives me a moment of hope.
Ours,
I know it's not going to solve everything.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's not 100%, but I'm going to have a little bit more peace of mind.
Yeah.
And that is
I will
something
on
I
your
could
behalf
use.
too. Yeah. Yeah.
Even just the brief peace of mind that a vaccination
Yeah.
brings me will be very nice.
You and I keep talking each other off of cliffs because people keep talking about this phenomenon too, the pandemic wall, where it's just like, okay, I was fine, I could deal with it. I haven't eaten out in a year,
Yeah.
and don't remember what being in a bar is like. All this
No.
stuff. It was. I think I've talked about this last time too, but you can tell it's just bothering me because I'm getting repetitive about it. But I've lost my mind officially about
you are going
pandemic.
through it differently than I am right now. That's for sure. But I also I was just thinking about this. I do have the opportunity to see people during the day.
Yeah.
Like I do see my coworkers, not a lot, but like we pass each other. And I do have student interaction. So I do have humans to be
I have very
near.
limited human interaction.
You have very limited. So that's a different
which
kind
is
of hard
normally
for
how I
you.
want it to be, but I
Normally
get,
I thrive.
normally that is
This is my
normally,
dream.
It's my preferred state, except that preferred state is balanced out with the occasional chosen
Yeah.
social interaction.
Yeah.
And now I don't have those occasional chosen social interactions, so I am losing my mind. It's started to really affect me. It's just starting to become a question of my mental health at this point. I'm like,
We have to do something.
I get it. We'll see. I'm okay. It's just
We have some things coming up though that I think will kind of maybe give you enough endorphins to get you through for a
That's
little
the
bit
thing
longer.
is just like I don't need very much
No.
social stuff, but the very small amount that I do need, I need it.
Yeah,
is what I've
it's
learned.
pretty important to you.
Yeah.
Well, we've learned a lot in this past year.
Yeah.
It's been almost a year.
It's been a journey of
We have,
self-discovery.
I think, 2 more episodes before it's a year that we
a year of pandemic.
checked in. Yeah.
Yeah. Happy 1 year.
I think
of this hell.
our tone this week is already better than the last
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah.
Anyways, gotta find healthy ways to take care of you.
Yeah.
And in the dead of winter, when all it is right now, we've had a lot of snow, really.
Yeah.
I could use some outside time.
I love the snow, but it's not easy to just take the dog for a walk in the
No.
snow, you know.
You really can't.
I mean, we could try, but it's just
a lot of work.
it's very cold too.
Anyways,
Yeah. Anyway.
that's our 2-week update
Yep.
on us.
Yep.
So what are we doing this week?
This week we're talking about Black History Month. It's kicking off today when we're recording,
It is.
right?
Yes, today's the 1st.
Today's the 1st.
We're
yeah.
recording on the 1st.
We're recording on the 1st.
You're listening on the 4th. Welcome from
Math.
past us to current today
Yes.
us.
Yes. So we're talking about this sometimes controversial, sometimes celebrated, deeply cared about, either way you look at it.
Strong
phenomenon
feelings both directions,
In
yes.
this country and in other places in the world. In Europe, you have a note here, it's celebrated in October.
Yeah.
But in the US and Canada, it's February, the month of February.
That's us.
So yeah, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, okay, I'll start. So here's how it started, like what we now know as Black History Month, okay? So it actually started as Negro History Week, and that was in 1926. Historian Carter G. Woodson.
26. That's sorry to interrupt. That's pretty far back.
Yeah, it is. And this guy is really important. As we did research, we kept finding Carter G. Woodson. I think he's actually Dr. Carter G. Woodson. I kept seeing him come up and up and up, and he seems to be the central figure as far as beginning this celebration. Carter G. Woodson and the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History announced the second week of February to be Negro History Week. That week was chosen because it coincided with the birthdays of both Abraham Lincoln on February 12th and of Frederick Douglass on February 14th. And so those were both dates that Black communities had celebrated together since the late 19th century. So we're talking like post-Civil War America. Carter G. Woodson believed that appreciating a people's history was a prerequisite to equality. He wrote, quote, "If a race has no history, if it has no worthwhile tradition, it becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world." So this is kind of his brain space for why he started to put a focus on something that would be specific to the week, if that makes sense. So basically, Lincoln's birthday and Frederick Douglass's birthday were already being celebrated. And so he found that as a reasonable time then to center these other events around it, basically.
Yeah, so I added that note in there about just sort of the reason behind the celebration was just this thought that history is really integral to the way we perceive society and certain subsets of society. So if we don't have an appreciation for the history of something, we won't have an appreciation for the whole rest of the thing, whatever that thing is. And I mean, you could say that that's part of the ongoing racial tensions that we have in this country.
For sure.
Is either a misunderstanding or a lack of understanding at all about the history of race relations in the country. So yes, totally on board with that sentiment that knowing the history of something is very important to understanding it.
And I think I'm trying to like talk about this in a way that acknowledges my whiteness, but also to say that I can understand the complexities of it. But essentially what I want to say is that Lincoln is difficult, right? Like as a figure, the Civil War is hard. And like even today, we still have people who believe that it was not a matter of slaves' rights, like as a, like a focus of the war itself. So I think it's really important and crucial, especially that it was that week that was chosen. Not only because of it being obviously Frederick Douglass's birthday, but especially because of Lincoln's. And so on Woodson's side, I'm like, well, this is totally the place to start talking about it, right? If we're focusing on tradition, this is where it begins. You know what I'm trying to say, though?
What you're trying to say.
Like the complexities of today, right? That people still have the rebel flag and Confederate flag around is because they're like states' rights. And it's like, well, also.
Yeah, I would agree with you there.
So
I
that's my
think
point.
That the problems that we're seeing, a lot of it is because of either not knowing any history at all or a whitewashed history being the only history that is taught.
Well, they're just cherry
or-
picking.
Yeah. I mean, whitewashing is really aggressive cherry picking. Yeah.
Right. But
I
I
guess
just meant
just
cherry picking
lying.
in the terms of talking about the Civil War as only a matter of states' rights.
Oh, sure.
That's what I meant by cherry picking. So it just
Yeah.
so happened that the states' rights happened to
mean,
respond
there's
to revolve around
well, there's
the enslavement of people.
Yeah, there's a sort of unfortunate fact entwined in all of that, and that Lincoln wrote variously. I mean, he also wrote about the issue of slavery, but he did happen to write at one point that there was the issue of states' rights at, it was part of the conflict.
But it's not a standalone issue.
No.
It's deeply entwined in the fact that
When people say
you
that,
can't separate those things, is my point.
I love to ask people when they say that the Civil War is about states' rights. I love to ask people, the rights to do
what?
To own slaves.
Oh, okay.
There
we go.
You're forgetting the more important part of that sentence.
Technically, sure. Ultimately, you're still missing something. Anyways.
States' rights to own slaves. Yeah.
Anyways,
Anyway,
so Woodson's primary emphasis was placed on encouraging the coordinated teaching of the history of Black Americans in the nation's public schools. And so the first Negro History Week was met with a lukewarm response, and it only got cooperation from the Departments of Ed from North Carolina, Delaware, and West Virginia, as well as administrations within Baltimore and D.C.
yeah, that's not surprising.
Slow
That's
start.
well, that's not surprising given the time frame. Like
No.
I was saying, this actually kind of seems earlier than I would have imagined. This came out of the civil rights era. And
Yes.
I guess we'll see later on that it kind of is connected with that in terms of how we know it now, but that it started out from this thing that started much earlier in the history of this country is pretty interesting to me.
So that's the 1926, right? Negro History Week. And then it did grow in popularity throughout the following decades with more and more mayors across the nation endorsing it as a holiday, which leads us up to the Black History Month that we know now, or what, we've come to know it as, actually has Ohio roots, which I didn't know. So it was first proposed by Black educators and the Black United students at Kent State University in February of 1969. And then the first celebration of Black History Month took place in Kent 1 year later, or at Kent rather, 1 year later in early 1970.
Interesting. Yeah, I put a note in here about how that Kent State University in 1970 might sound a little bit familiar because that is when the Kent State Massacre took place. That was in May of that year. So that's all of that was about, of course, the U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War, but that was a contentious time in the history of Kent State, and that age group. I mean, those it's contentious
18 to 22-year-olds are all
right.
very,
But that was just to say that there were some interesting protest movements kind of aligning between even the Black United students that you mentioned there and other student organizing groups at Kent State at that time.
Yeah.
They were doing things like protesting the presence of police recruiters on campus, all kinds of stuff going on at that moment at Kent State and across the country. But anyway.
So from there, 6 years later, jump to Black History Month is celebrated all across the country in educational institutions, at centers of Black culture and community centers, both great and small. And so actually President Gerald Ford recognized Black History Month during the celebration of the U.S. bicentennial. And so he urged Americans to, quote, seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our history.
Interesting.
Yeah. So in the Black community, though, Black History Month is usually met with enthusiastic responses. We'll kind of talk about that a little bit more, but it did prompt the creation originally of Black history clubs and an increase in interest among teachers and interest from progressive whites. So in that way, it has helped spark the conversation that is crucial, right? Like to celebrate Black people and their cultures and communities and things like that. I love this story, and I remember this happening, but on February 21st, 2016, there was a 106-year-old Washington, D.C. resident and school volunteer, Virginia McLaren, and she visited the White House as part of Black History Month. Do you remember this video? So she was there, obviously, with the Obamas, and when asked by the president why she was there, she said, a Black president, a Black wife, and I'm here to celebrate Black history. That's what I'm here for, and they danced. And it's adorable. And precious. And so moments like that, man, that's good stuff. So that's kind of the general history of Black History Month. And so now, obviously being February, you're going to probably be seeing it all over, I hope, and finding ways to celebrate and lift these voices that are so crucial to the story of America.
Yeah. So you mentioned this briefly. It's not, as a sort of cultural entity, Black History Month is not without controversy. So, and even within, Black communities, there's controversy around Black History Month. So when it was first established, people who believed that it was limited to educational institutions questioned whether it was appropriate to confine the celebration of Black history to 1 month, as opposed to integrating Black history into mainstream curricula,
Sure.
Which makes a lot of sense. There have been some sort of outstanding voices, and like actor Morgan Freeman, actress Stacey Dash. They've criticized the concept of declaring only 1 month as Black History Month. Freeman said I don't want a Black History Month. Black history is American history. I think that's a worthwhile point. Now, whether or not calling attention to a subset of American history for a month is a good or bad thing for raising the visibility of that, I really don't have the answer to that. That seems like a question for curriculum developers, but unfortunately it's a question of cultural zeitgeist. It seems to be a more loaded question. For
Yeah.
me, that question seems to be best addressed by how do people learn best, focusing on one thing for a short period of time, or whether that thing should be integrated throughout a curriculum. So I totally understand what the concern is there. There's another concern in that the original inspiration for Black History Month, which was, a desire to address the manner in which American schools fail to represent Black historical figures as anything other than slaves or colonial subjects, which kind of is, true. Black History Month could reduce complex historical figures to overly simplified objects of hero worship. I do think we see this one a lot. We're probably guilty of it. I don't mean to exempt us from this criticism, but we tend to, especially white Americans, tend to latch on to a few political figures. I'm thinking of like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, the big ones that make it into the textbooks that are published by companies largely run and motivated by white professionals. It's
Dollars.
It's just what I even remember having this exact conversation when we were doing the Ruby Bridges episode. I remember my textbooks talking about this story, but the way they talked about it made it seem like this nice, friendly interaction between a Black schoolgirl and a white school. And they're like, oh, look at this nice, thought leader paving the way for integration, when really that girl basically went through hell for, a year. They mention the feel good part of the story, but leave out the struggle. And I think that is exactly the kind of whitewashing that people are concerned about when they talk about Black History Month and this hero worship issue. So totally understand that one. Then we've got...
Well, can I say one more thing?
Sure.
I was just reading, I follow Martin Luther King Jr.'s daughter, Bernice King. I follow her on Twitter. And one of her tweets that I read, I think it was last week, was about how the majority of the United States didn't support Martin Luther King Jr., right? Like, even though us today look back on him and we're like hero, savior, you know what I mean? Like all of these things that Martin Luther King gets to be now, at the time of his death and leading up to it, he was not that highly liked and respected and supported. And so this is what history has done over time, right? Is that we can look back and be like, oh, can't believe they'd let that happen to Martin, all of these things. But in reality, he wasn't well liked at the time. And he wasn't this figure. And so the history books can write them this way, but that doesn't make it true.
One of the articles that I read when I was researching this was talking about, because I was kind of looking at critical receptions of Black History Month as a thing. And one of the articles that I read was talking about how in America today, especially white America, people revere Martin Luther King Jr., but will disavow Colin Kaepernick, who is likewise participating in a form of nonviolent protest that is motivated by racial tension and all kinds of injustice and all kinds of stuff. It's motivated by the same things that Martin Luther King Jr. is motivated by, yet we idolize and sort of do this hero worship of MLK, but we don't treat our Black activists in this era with respect like we treat the ones who are, no longer living. Yeah. It's much easier for white America to process historical civil rights figures, but not ones who are active now. And it's just
like what you're saying about Cap, right? I saw a thing going on I think it was Twitter as well, but it was how can we separate Drew Brees from his politics, but not Colin Kaepernick? And it's the same thing. Drew Brees, people can, in their head, right, separate what he said about Black people and these basically racist comments, I would even say, as they hinged on it. And Tom Brady, same thing. And so we can idolize and love Tom Brady and Drew Brees, but we can't do the same thing for Colin Kaepernick. So why can we separate these white guys from their politics and their sport, but not a Black man?
Yeah, I think the answer is pretty obvious there.
Because they're white.
We're racists. But
no, I'm agreeing, but I'm just saying another example of that, right? Is that Drew Brees and Tom Brady both have said some not great stuff, and we can still be like, oh, well, I just like him as a football player, but I don't agree. But no. Yeah. That's them.
Yeah.
Anyways, don't get me started on Tom Brady.
I won't. Ugh. Yeah. Anyway, long story short, I think we do kind of fall prey to the hero worship dangers associated with Black History Month. By we, I mean usually white people. We are the ones who tend to hero worship at the expense of the actual ongoing activity toward civil liberties and civil rights in this country.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is heavy.
So there's another kind of realm of criticism that I don't give much.
I can't believe you're giving it any airtime.
I just want to mention it as a form of criticism of Black History Month, is that some people are like, well, it's racist because it should just be called American history. So this sounds sort of like what Morgan Freeman said, I don't want Black History Month. Black history is American history, right? So what Morgan Freeman is saying is Black history should be studied at all times alongside and as a part of the story of American history. What this other kind of criticism is saying is a much more vapid and ridiculous. It's very much like all lives matter, but for the topic of history.
Sure.
They're like, oh, well, it's not just Black
should
history
just be
that
learning,
matters.
yeah.
Yeah. So we don't really need to pay very much attention to that kind of criticism. One other thing, there's this sort of corporatization of Black History Month.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I just wanted to point this out because it bothers me a lot. We've seen the same thing happen with Pride.
Yes. What a shame.
Corporations, organizations kind of latch on to
Everything becomes a rainbow.
Yeah. They're like, oh, we can sell rainbow whatever.
Oreos.
The same thing, I don't think to the same degree as Pride, but the same thing can happen with Black History Month where companies can use it to sell tchotchkes, basically. But there has been, and this does happen with like Pride too, I guess I should say, is that some organizations use it as a mechanism to fundraise for like, Black-owned nonprofits, organizations. There's more activity directed toward Black-owned companies, businesses, that kind of stuff. So there's a give and take there, but anytime you give the weight of a special month dedicated to something, corporate America will step in and be like, well, how can I enter this
Well,
conversation?
since you brought it up.
Yeah. So just to wrap up this section, I want to read a kind of longish excerpt from this article called America is Losing the Real Meaning of Black History Month. The article is written by Theodore Johnson. He's a director of the Fellows Program at the Washington, D.C. office of the Brennan Center for Justice. I'm just going to read it in its whole and then talk about it maybe a little bit. It's kind of long, but bear with me because it's pretty interesting. So here goes. It is much more comforting to believe that resolving the race issue is a simple matter of Black people assuming more personal responsibility combined with better policy. But good behavior has never released a people from oppression, not even the founding fathers. And without a change in how the nation views its Black citizens, even good policy will be used as a cudgel. A magic pill to reduce health disparities would be rationed. A work program to reduce employment disparities would become a cash cow for those in power. And reparations would incite the most creative, exploitive financial vehicles the country has ever seen. How do we know? Because we've seen the movie before. Housing bubbles and payday lenders come for Black wealth first. Affirmative action has helped more white workers and students than Black ones. White flight from schools and neighborhoods rose once federal desegregation statutes were passed. And changes to state voting laws accelerated once a Black president took office. Programs to help those who are not valued provide little value to those who need the programs most. It's not that policy doesn't matter. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, it may be true that law cannot change the heart, but it can restrain the heartless. It may be true that the law cannot make a man love me, but it can keep him from lynching me. This is true, and yet Trayvon Martin is not here. James Byrd is not here. Eric Garner and Latasha Harlins are not here. Policy is needed, but the politics of Black history tell us that policy ain't enough. Only recognizing and respecting the dignity and equality of Black Americans can deliver the nation we all want, and Black History Month is a means to this end. Don't get me wrong, the accomplishments of Black people in the United States merit special attention, particularly given slavery's inhumanity and its vestiges that still shape the nation. And the sustained popularity of the National Museum of African American History and Culture is a testament to the interest and curiosity about Black culture that grips much of the nation. But these things exist, so Americans will see the humanity in Black people, not just so they can walk away with an interesting fact about the first Black senator or an entrepreneur who built a hair care business empire. Woodson believed, that's Carter G. Woodson is who he's talking about. Woodson believed that celebrating Black history was a political act to destroy the dividing prejudices of nationality and teach universal love without distinction of race, merit, or rank. not because learning about, say, a Black inventor would inspire white magnanimity, but because failure to accept Black people as fellow architects of the United States is an existential threat to the nation we call home. So, end quote. That, it's a pretty good article. It's a way of calling attention to what I think are the kind of current problems with the institution of Black History Month.
Sure.
About how we're sort of losing the point in various ways, but it's a sort of constructive critique of it, I think, to say this is why we need it. This is why it was created. It's created to, in a lot of ways, to make itself eventually disappear. You know, the need for Black History Month should, over time, wane, because Black history should be
Part of it.
seen as our history. But unless and until we can look at Black people in this country as, like this author says, fellow architects of the country, I think we have to continue to have these kinds of
Be
institutions.
this intentional about it.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. Be mindful and be intentional. So that was how I rounded up the critiques.
Well, I would also say this. I think that was a great, I like the thing you ended with. I think most importantly, the only thing that we can really say about it is that you and I don't get to decide, right? Like we are not the people who make the decision about when we, you know, won't need it. And so it seems now that it's important.
Yeah, I would also just say, like, we have to be careful too, because we tend to look at these issues a little too simplistically. We say something like, well, the Black community either does or doesn't like. There is no one, there is no one sentiment
that covers it all.
that covers everyone who is Black.
Right. My point was just that white people will not be the ones to decide when we no longer need to intentionally set aside a month of learning.
Yeah,
that's my only point.
That's really not up to us, and nor should it be.
So this year, just to kind of round this out, Black Lives Matter has actually been nominated for a 2021 Nobel Peace Prize, which I was just so excited to read about. A member of the Norwegian parliament said that he nominated the organization because it, quote, was bringing forward a new consciousness and awareness about racial justice. And it went on to say, to carry forward a movement of racial justice and the spread to other countries is very, very important. Black Lives Matter is the strongest force today during this, not only in the US, but also in Europe and in Asia. He went on to say that Black Lives Matter carries forward the legacy of earlier racial justice movements, such as the Civil Rights Movement in the U.S. and the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. So nominating Black Lives Matter is not far from the course. It's consistent with who they have awarded this to before. And I think it's great to see it on this stage in this way, because I think it's bringing a great light to it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know that you just mentioned right before the show, but I think Stacey Abrams is also
she was nominated as well. And man...
It's basically for her, as far as I understood it,
her voter.
Yeah, the voter turnout push that she...
Her work to get them registered and to make it accessible.
Right. And
possible.
a large portion of her work in Georgia was among Black communities there to increase voter turnout in those runoff elections. So that's interesting timing with the announcement of the nominations in Black History Month.
And so to end this episode, I wanted to talk about ways to support and celebrate it, and especially in a classroom, obviously. There's a lot of links we're going to be posting with this episode, so make sure that you reference those for some of this stuff. But these are just a few of the things. You don't want to whitewash it, obviously, which is maybe the most important thing we can do as educators.
I think it's also the hardest thing for a lot of educators to do, because even you and I are having a difficulty talking about this stuff because we don't want to whitewash, but we also want to be aware of our privilege and whiteness. But it becomes, because even like what I said, it becomes very difficult when you as a teacher, even all the materials that might have been available to you because that's just how you learned about it, might be whitewashing some of this stuff, like the textbook that I read when I was growing up about Ruby Bridges. So
that's true, yes. For me, that is not the case, because as an English teacher, I can just bring those stories right into my classroom. So in the classroom, for me, I'm going to be sharing the stories of Black writers, including Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who is one of my favorite feminists of all time, Amanda Gorman, the poet who recited at Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's inauguration, Jason Reynolds, Stacey Abrams, a little bit of her stuff, and Sharon Draper, who's one of my all-time faves as well. So, like, I'm intentionally, you know what I mean, trying to pick out Black stories and Black voices to share with them. And I think that that's one of the most important ways to do it, is for me not to be the one telling them, right? For us just to be reading it directly from them. And so there's also the Association for the Study of African American Life and History and the National Museum of African American History and Culture websites. And they've got a ton of really great info about all kinds of things to be doing this month in your classrooms. And they're already created entire units, things like that. And as well as NAACP. So there'll be links to all of those. If you have money to give, you could start in your own community. And that's really, really important for especially like for Columbus and places like that for us in Ohio. You could give to obviously the ACLU, the NAACP, or really importantly, the historically Black colleges and universities or HBCUs. And if you're looking at our Instagram, you're going to be seeing posts for all of the HBCUs that are in Ohio as a way to kind of recognize them for their work. And there's also a link attached that have 174 places to consider donating to during Black History Month.
Yeah, I do want to note about, I saw a really interesting tweet a while back. It was actually having to do with Stacey Abrams, but it was talking about how people who are interested in supporting, racial equality initiatives, what do you do? What are you going, what if you were interested in driving out, voter turnout to make changes? But a lot of people were saying, hey, don't assume that there isn't something already there in your communities to support. Don't assume that you can just kind of come in and be the superhero and start an effort. Maybe take a look at efforts that are already existing in a lot of these communities and support those, because there are boots on the ground people in a lot of these communities who have been doing, again, this is more about like political work than other kinds, but there are people in these communities who have been doing this work for decades, kind of largely unnoticed and unsupported. So just do a little work, look into local organizers if you're interested in political advocacy along these lines. Take a look at what's already there before you assume that you need to start from scratch, because there are a lot of...
Well, yeah, and like when I was saying, like starting your own community, like most cities will already have ACLU and NAACPs and things like that. So I was trying to say, like, start at home. And the last thing that I want to include about celebrating and supporting Black History Month is that the most important thing that you can do if you're not Black is just to be an ally. And that is... Gosh, it looks like a lot of things, but most importantly for me, I think in the past years, I've really been trying to focus on unlearning things. And unlearning something is so hard. So you have to be very intentional about it. Chelsea and I this month decided we would read another book on racism and some of the concerns of that in America to try to help continue our efforts in unlearning. We are not perfect. Yeah, obviously, if you listen to the whole cut of this, you would know it took us a few tries to say the things because we wanted to be intentional. But it's not easy. We just have to unlearn some stuff. Yeah. And so I think, sorry, just one more thing really quickly, but I wanted to say, when you were talking earlier about how Black History Month is American history, in my school and in schools that I've known of, there has been pushback for teachers to talk about or to teach certain figures, maybe Black writers or Black poets or things like that. On the education side of it, it's really nice to be able to have on your side, like, oh, this is part of my Black History Month, unit or something like that. There should not have to be an excuse for teaching anyone's writing. Like, as an English teacher, that makes me insane, but there are some very conservative parts, especially. And so when they don't like who their kid is reading about or something like that, it's very easy to be like, oh my gosh, this is part of my unit. It centers on this. So hopefully, obviously, the goal is to not have to rely on things like that and for it to be American history. But until we can accept that and allow it to be, it's important to celebrate it. Mm-hmm. Sorry, what were you going to say?
You and I, just to back up what you mentioned there, you and I are going to read So You Want to Talk About Race pretty soon and probably talk about it on the podcast after that. But I think we're doing that because we actually even mentioned this on the podcast, but we read White Fragility at some point, I think last year.
Summer?
Yeah, over last summer. And there's been a lot of conversation and pushback about that book because it is written by a white woman who centers white experiences of dealing with racism. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of the criticism of that book is warranted because the woman who wrote that, what's her name? Robin DiAngelo. She is a sort of corporate aligned HR person whose job is basically to help companies, make their racial problems disappear or go away, or, the whole point of it is to help protect voices that don't really need that much more protection, I think is part of the criticism with her book. I personally think that while all of those criticisms are totally valid, I think that those types of criticisms often come from people who maybe aren't quite as in touch with the level of hostility that certain parts of America feel toward this kind of stuff. I feel like White Fragility is a good book targeted toward well-meaning center, maybe even center left, but also center right white readers in this country. I think that for people who have no way in, who are so uncomfortable discussing race that they have to start at zero, it's not where you should stop reading. It's where you should start reading if you're that kind of person.
Yes.
Now, obviously, we're moving on to other kinds of books, you and I, to talk about the issue of race. But I do think that White Fragility, while I, again, totally valid criticisms of it exist, I think that it might have a place as a book for people who think that they're on the good guys' side of this issue, but who don't understand that the way that they talk about things can be harmful. So it's not for the serious activists. It's not for people who have been doing the work toward racial equality in this country. It's not for those people. So when those people read it, they're like, what the heck is this?
Yeah, they're like, why?
And they're like, what is this junk?
Like, we gotta start somewhere else.
Yes, I think the problem is that other people have to start somewhere that is closer to zero. And so anyway, we're trying to expand our own horizons about this stuff, and we're trying to deal with it the best way that we know how to deal with it. But yeah.
So this month, be intentional. Go searching for things. Find ways to help elevate stories and voices that need it.
Yeah.
All right. Last episode's question.
Yes. Fill in the blank.
Another Morgan Freeman reference.
Yes,
Who
it is
knew
Morgan Freeman.
He was going to be back. So last episode's question. One of Morgan Freeman's most famous movies, The Shawshank Redemption, is about the maybe wrongly imprisoned Andy Dufresne, who is played by Tim Robbins, and his efforts to create and build a library for the men imprisoned at the Shawshank State Prison. Andy's efforts would not be possible without this character, who serves as a sole employee at the library until Andy comes along. Fun hint, this character has a pet bird named Jake. It's our guy Brooks.
Brooks.
God, his character is just so great. Anyways.
Yeah.
You want to do this week's?
Sure. This episode's question. This black singer, songwriter, and entrepreneur was known as the King of Soul, with his most popular songs being Cupid, A Change Is Gonna Come, and Chain Gang. Recently, Leslie Odom portrayed this important musician in the Amazon movie One Night in Miami, which we just watched, which was really good. Who is this smooth singer?
We did.
Yeah.
Good movie.
It was a good movie. It sent us on a whole journey.
We ended up
We're still on it, actually.
We ended up in a Malcolm X Netflix special.
Yeah. And
then
now
we watched a special on this guy.
Yes.
I mean, we're learning. We're trying here.
And then we accidentally watched, and this is what has to do with what I learned this past couple of weeks. Then we accidentally watched a connected documentary about Scientology.
I really can't.
I always fall into these traps of like being really interested in these weird cults. I'm just fascinated that people
so wait,
can be...
this is what you learned. Let's keep it on theme.
Well, I was just gonna say, so we watched this thing about Scientology, and Scientology, as it turns out, currently and recently has had crossovers with the Nation of Islam, which is something that came up as we were watching. When we were watching One Night in Miami. That was all present there. So we started watching this thing on Scientology, knowing that there was going to be any overlap between that and what we had just watched.
It was like everyone arrived in the same Venn diagram bubble at the same time.
I think the Netflix algorithm was really trolling us. But
until you pick something for me to watch, and then it gives you straight trash.
Yeah.
Okay, so online with that,
yes.
What did you learn this week?
So the thing is about Scientology, which is a sort of pseudo-religion / self-help / cult organization. It's hard to explain it. I'm not going to go into all of the details.
Part of it.
I think Scientology is very bad, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it's a really scary organization that blackmails and stalks people and all kinds of stuff. And once you get in, you can't get out, and it's yikes scary. And also the stuff that they actually believe is even crazier than the stories of all the stalking and weird stuff that goes on to members and former members. But anyway, the thing that so what we learned from this documentary was that within Scientology, there's this group called the Sea Org, which
I did not know about this.
It's CSEA organization. It's like where all of the uppermost sort of officers, leaders, whatever they are called, of Scientology, they're all members of this thing called the Sea Org. and it's literally on a boat, among other things. They bought
Literally.
it's literally the sea. They bought a cruise ship at some point in like I think 85 or something. They bought a cruise ship and they send people out to sea. A lot of people say they do this because when you're on the high seas, you avoid a lot of scrutiny from like the IRS and other things. The FDA, which I'm not sure why the FDA was scrutinizing them, but anyway.
Oh.
Yeah, the
Do
Food
they
and
sell
Drug Admin.
products?
Oh yeah, they sell all kinds of crap. So
Well, they must if the FDA wants them.
they sell a bunch of stuff. They sell curricula and they sell other things.
Oh, whoa.
related. But yeah, I don't know exactly what they would have been doing to attract the attention of the FDA. But anyway,
Sorry.
Scientology. They have this boat and this Sea Org, and so they float members around to do this Scientology like training. It's like this weird caste system of living on a boat. You call everyone sir, and it's just like you can't have children if you're members of this org.
I didn't know that either. Honestly, I really did learn a lot.
really
I'm mad,
weird.
but I did learn a lot.
Okay, so anyway, all of that, there's a huge rabbit hole for Scientology that I'm probably going to continue to fall down. But the one thing that I actually like, kind of this brain pop moment that happened was a link between this subset of Scientology, this Sea Org, and a book that I read last summer called Snow Crash.
Yes, which you love.
It's a great book. It's about kind of like VR and augmented reality, and like the word avatar as we know it came from this book actually, but like
Really?
There's a metaverse and you go and you have an avatar that represents you in this internet world that is not the real world. But that whole book is very trippy and weird, but there's this character in it. His name is L. Bob Rife, and if you didn't know, the founder of Scientology is named L. Ron Hubbard. And in the book Snow Crash, L. Bob Rife has this pseudo-religious, pseudo-scientific organization. He believes in all these kind of weird things about hacking the brain. And like, anyway, they float around on ships. He floats around on a converted aircraft carrier. Again, the Sea Org, the real life Sea Org, has been called a paramilitary group. They're kind of a paramilitary group in the book in Snow Crash. And I had no idea when I first read it that all of that stuff was based on L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology. But now that I have learned about the Sea Org, it's very obvious that it's based on Scientology.
You figured it out.
But it's just like, I mean, I enjoyed the book for a lot of different reasons,
Sure.
but like knowing that it had actually that real world connection, which I didn't know before, was what I learned this week, and it was very exciting.
That's cool. I mean, it's cool in the sense of however cool.
In the sense that it's horrifying, yes.
It's
Very
terrifying,
cool.
and that's cool.
Yeah.
I did learn a lot. I knew about Leah Remini. Well, it's her show. That's where we got into this. Leah Remini is the famous actress.
Former Scientologist.
Former Scientologist who now basically goes around and just throws absolute shade at the Scientology community. I don't know. What do you call them? The church? I guess?
Adherents? I don't know.
Yeah.
They're not a church. I don't know what to call them.
Yeah, they're horrible, basically.
I mean, they might call themselves a church, but
Well, I think she calls them that a couple of times.
I think they
Anyways,
call themselves the Church of Scientology, but they're not. It's not
what it should be.
It's not religion in any way that I know of religion.
No,
but they
no,
get
no.
out of they're tax exempt because they consider themselves to be a religion,
Right.
or something like
that weird. They've got, yeah. Okay. Anyways, wow. We could really get into it here.
it. Sure.
So I learned this week, well, one, I had a plug for a movie. It's like
an
a film adaptation.
It's a film stage production.
Yes. It's on Hulu and it's called In and of Itself. I'm not going to say anything other than just go to Hulu and watch In and of Itself. Follow the directions at the beginning, which are to put your phone down. And then just like sink into something very comfortable and watch it.
Don't
Have snacks.
don't Google it beforehand.
Don't Google it.
Don't look it up.
Maybe some tissues. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
And that's it.
It's
Yeah.
weird and mesmerizing.
It is. It's one of the coolest things I've ever watched, I would say. And it's a really great hour and a half of your life just to kind of think on yourself. So anyways, that's the first thing. So that's my little plug. We also plugged One Night in Miami, which was really good. We both liked that. And the other thing that I learned is the Dyatlov Pass. Is that how we say it?
I think so.
Dyatlov. Okay. It's about those 9 mountain hikers, I don't know, adventurous people who got lost. I think it was like 59. They went missing in Russia. And there's always been all of these theories around what happened to this whole group of people because they would have known their way and how to survive, right? Like they were very well prepared, like all of this stuff.
It's really weird because the state in which they found the campsite was very strange.
Right.
Like, people were in different places. Some of them didn't have clothes
They were
on.
separated. They had
It was super
weird
weird.
injuries.
Yeah,
they had
inconsistent injuries. They could not figure out what.
They had only escaped their tent by cutting from the inside out of it.
Yeah.
And so all of these people since the 59 have been trying to figure out what happened to this group of very well-prepared explorers, essentially. And so essentially what it came down to was the technology used by GM on the cadavers that they used to figure out how to create a proper seatbelt.
Yeah, way back when GM was first doing seatbelt research.
So that
did
technology
Cadaver research.
partnered with the technology used in Frozen, the
movie.
movie about snow. And they combined those two technologies and were able to figure out that, long story short, these hikers thought that the slope that they put their tent on was not as steep as it actually was because of a buildup of snow. So when they cleared out the small area to put their tent down, they actually built into like a 30-degree angle of this, you know what I mean, the mountain. And that snow compounded with, that had been taken, like when they, dug it out, that obviously weakened the snow that was up behind them, up further up the mountain. And then partnered with the really strong winds, essentially what happened was they created a perfect storm that would create a baby avalanche.
Interesting.
But I mean, there's a lot more to it. I'm like doing the best that I can,
but this
based
is kind
on
of
my
like
lack of knowledge on this kind of adventuring. But
this is the new theory, though, right?
it is the newest theory, and it seems to make the most sense. And there are other parts to it. It's a very interesting story. But essentially, what I learned was that Disney Pixar is doing some really great work. Or actually, it's just Disney.
So these animators have found a way to model snow and snowfall in a way that is pretty realistic.
Yeah,
because
and
these
all of these
researchers-
professionals that had looked into it who weren't working together were all like, holy cow, like their snow is so well done. Like, how did they make it so realistic, essentially? And so one of the guys that was doing the research went to Disney and was like, tell me about how you use this technology to create your snow.
Wow.
And so they took the technology of Disney's snow and then partnered it with the GM cadaver work on seatbelts. And that's how they were able to figure out like the rate and like the like all of that stuff of this avalanche that they created, and how the injuries and the whole story kind of is consistent with them being ran off the mountain by this avalanche that they essentially created. So anyways, I'm not a scientist. Don't come at me, please. I do not ski. I do not hike. I've read this article and I happen to like Frozen. So I know the basics, and I'm encouraging you to go read about it yourself. So that's my homework. It was interesting though.
Yeah.
In my head, it makes a lot more sense than how I just explained it. And I'm kind of upset with myself, but it's fine.
It's okay. It's okay.
Anything else? Please help me.
No, I think that's about it.
Okay. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you for listening. I think that's about it. And
please remember to rate, review, and subscribe.
Yeah. Do us a solid and suggest our podcast to one of your educator friends. Just pass it along.
Or just like share our stuff on your Instagram if you see it, or our Facebook. Just help us.
We're just trying to reach a few more people.
Reach out.
Yeah.
And doing this during the pandemic made sense, but it's really kind of hard to grow without ever seeing other, like I can't go to any of my normal conferences to talk about things.
We're not able to go to conferences. We're not really able to even see people to talk about it. So, and people aren't commuting right now.
My coworkers have heard enough. So.
Yeah, you only have a limited pool of coworkers that you could push this on. So, do us a favor.
It's true.
Just rate it, review it, pass it along, whisper to your friends about our hilarious, awesome podcast where you learn stuff.
Mostly factual and true.
Mostly factual podcast. All right.
Anyways,
that's about it.
See you next time.
See you next time. Bye.
Listeners, thanks for supporting 16 to 1.
We're trying to grow our audience, so please check us out at 16to1.com, all spelled out, and tell your friends about the show.
On our website, you can find links to follow us on social media, an archive of all our old episodes, and a contact form where you can get in touch.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next show. Well, howdy doody.